Awesome, awesome. Okay, so I'll go through this. I know we have about an hour, probably about an hour and 15 minutes left. So I will go through this. Hopefully, I'll go through it pretty quickly because to me, the most important part is the questions and answers afterwards. So after I present this, definitely keep notes. Write some stuff down. I won't be watching the chat. I'll come back to it later, but definitely want to engage with you guys after this talk for any questions that you may have, or even better yet, this is the thing that makes me better. If you look at this and say, Calvin, that's a bunch of hogwash, it doesn't work, right? Tell me that too. My skin has become very thick over the years of working in different corporate settings. And so I'm also the one to kind of raise my hand and like, hey, if I miss something, please say that. I'm not ashamed. I'm not going to be too precious about this work because I realize that that's what makes everything that I do better, right? Better for me, my career, my team, all of the above, right? But what I wanted to do is recap a conversation that I gave at UX Strat back in September of this year. So UX Strat, if you all don't know, it is a conference. I really call it it's kind of like a tribe. It's not really like a conference to me because it's a group of people that Paul Bryant, the founder of that organization, pulled this conference together for professionals like us to have very strategic conversations around experience design, user experience design. And it's less about the cool new shiny tech that you can put out, but it's more about the rigor and the strategy and how do you operationalize UX in your respective companies, whether it's a startup or a big corporation, Fortune 100 company, whatever the case may be. And so that's what it became. That's what the community became over the time. And so I've been to this conference multiple times. I think I've been there about 6 times or so. I've spoken about 3 of them. And this year's conversation was around developing and implementing a design strategy framework. And so this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart because out of the 3 places where I've been fortunate to lead and build design teams, the first being at the Federal Reserve Bank, the second being at Lowe's, and now that I'm at Best Buy, there is definitely a thread that I'm connecting with all 3 of those organizations. It's basically the same problem, the same challenges, the same process, the same maturity questions that I have to tackle. It's just a different set of people. It's just a different set of problems that we have to solve for that respective organization. And so what I'm learning as I'm rinsing and repeating this process over time is that it works. It just works, but it takes a lot of rigor and intention to put this into practice and to not give up when it doesn't work, but to stick with the plan and bringing the right people together to support you to put that together. And so that's kind of what I'll talk about here in this session today. The thing that stuck out to me about this particular theme was the word strategy. And the thing I like about the word strategy is because when I took the Strength Finders, Clifton Strengths. So if you're familiar with any of those, does anybody remember like their top 3 or their top 5 strengths? If you've taken this personality test, this is where I got that from. My number 1 strength was strategic. And so when I was putting together the presentation for this theme, that word jumped out at me. And so I looked up, I was like, well, how did Clifton Strengths, define strategic or define strategy? And so this is the salient points from that: creating alternative ways to proceed. And faced with any given scenario, one can spot the relevant patterns and issues, or sorting through clutter to find the best route. Or, I think this is me in a nutshell. You see patterns where others see complexity. And I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in and I see what the challenge is, what the problem is, and I get super excited because I see patterns. And I'll begin to speak from the patterns that I see, but other people will go, wow, that's too hard, or no, we can't do that. Oh, we don't have enough time. Oh, we don't have enough money. And it's kind of negative, right? And so I realized early on that that was the benefit that I brought to the table, is being strategic, looking at those different problems and looking at those different challenges and saying, hey, I see something different. Who else sees these? Who else can see these patterns? And how can we pull those people together to solve these problems? But just like I mentioned, right, you can have one person looking at a glass half full, the other person looks at it half empty, and there lies the problem, right? And so when you're dealing with people, the challenge with people, and I got to be careful how I say this, because now that I'm a leader, I actually actually kind of dig working with people, right? This is what I do day in and day out. But there's a nuance, right? I've learned that people, they don't like to be told what to do, but if you tell them what they are supposed to do or what they need to do, there's a difference in that. And the big difference is when you're telling somebody, it's all about you as the deliverer of said message, you telling them, or you putting them in a place of like, listen to my authority, like do what I say, versus when you're more concerned about what is being told to them in a way that's put in a place where I'm going to tell you something, or I'm going to give you something, and can you receive it? As the receiver, it's less about me being the deliverer, and it's more about you being the receiver. Can I communicate to you in a way that you can receive it and translate it however you need to translate it, and then turn that into action, or turn that into success, or turn that into whatever? And that was one of the things that I noticed, that that's the biggest difference between, especially when it comes to UX and being more strategic. It's not about standing on a podium or sharing with somebody, this is what Gartner says, or this is what Forrester says, or this is what Apple does, because nobody really wants to hear that. People are more adept to listen to you when you say, okay, how do I break this down and fashion it so that you can receive it and do with it what you need to do with it. And so as I'm thinking about that whole process, right, not only for me leading different teams, but even as I'm communicating this message to you. And one of the things that I wanted to do is, how can I simplify this complex situation? And the three words that came to mind was locate, navigate, and assimilate. The thing that made me successful in my career was my ability to see those patterns and to be able to articulate the patterns that I'm seeing. And the way that I would do that is I would first go to people and say, where are you right now? So let's not try to fix the situation. Let's try to locate where you are in your given process. Where are you with your skill sets as a designer, as a researcher, as a strategist, as a leader, as a designer, whatever? Where are you? Where are you in your organization? Where are you in the design process? Where are you in your software development life cycle? Just where can you locate where you are right now? That's the first step. And then after that, you have to say, well, here's where I am, here's where I want to be. And how do I navigate to that spot, to where I want to be? Do I have the tools to navigate to that spot? If I don't, then how do I learn those tools? And then after I've successfully navigated to that section, how do I assimilate? How do I look, feel, smell like the thing, like the place that I'm trying to get to, right? If when we got on the call, Jason and I were talking about, being in different cities, like being in Colorado, right? And so when you're traveling, especially if you're going to like another state or another country that you don't know the language, part of you moving to that place is, how do you fit in? How do you assimilate with the space that's there? And a lot of times for people in UX, assimilation means not selling out, but how do you speak the language of business? How do you speak the language of engineering so that you can get the accomplishments done that you're seeking? A lot of times in our world, the reason why we're not getting the results that we want is because we haven't effectively assimilated to this new world that we're in. And so that's the goal. I want you to think about those three words: locate, navigate, and assimilate. And hopefully you'll see those patterns emerge as I continue through this talk. But when I when I think about how I've built teams and how I've matured design within respective organizations, for the most part, I used only two tools. The first tool was a design maturity model. And so I'm using one here. This is one that I've kind of illustrated from the Nielsen Norman Group. I know they just recently redesigned or updated their maturity model. I remember when I was leading the UX team at the Fed, I was using the Nielsen Norman model. It was a little bit different from this. I think they updated theirs maybe last year or the year before. Um, but at the time when I introduced the model, I had the team. We actually set up a big meeting around this too, and I asked everybody on the team, "How mature do you think we are as a design team?" And so they would look at the scale, and they would say, "Oh, I think we're structured or whatever, right?" And then I said, "Okay, well, let's read this article. Let's read through the Nielsen Norman article about the maturity model, and then tell me where you are." And just about everybody in the room measured themselves at least one step lower than where they actually were, right? They actually started to locate where they were based on this research that Nielsen Norman had already done. And so when in most companies where I start in a new role, this will be one of the first tools to bring up, because instead of us trying to figure out solutions right away, I just want to know where everybody is right now. And one of the best ways I can do that is to start off by using one of these maturity models. I did the same thing when I was at Lowe's. When I started my position at Lowe's, the the design team was already circulating the design maturity model that Envision put out about 2 years ago. And so I just used that. That was the tool that everybody was already using. To me, it wasn't about which tool I was using, it was about assimilating to what the culture was already doing. So the fact that they were already using the Envision model, I said, hey, let's just use that. And I did the same thing. Where are we right now? And everybody kind of rated themselves pretty low. And as the year progressed, I basically made it a goal for me to say year after year, we're just going to focus on going from one level to the next. So the first year I was there, we wanted to go from like level 1 to level 2. And then the next year was like level 2 to level 3. That was it. Nothing more, nothing less. But the fact that I could just use those tools and I can get everybody on board, it allowed us to, over time, start to use um, the more formal maturity model framework that Envision offered, because we were an enterprise customer to Envision. After I came in and did kind of the informal assessment with the team, and that worked for the first year, the second year we came back and we brought Envision into the company to do a formal assessment with all of the UX teams. And we had our own data reports, and all the UX managers got together and we kind of compared notes of what worked, what didn't work with the team. And so we made it a thing. We made it a formalized process that year over year over year, we could start to use this framework to mature our teams, right? And so now that I'm at Best Buy, I'm kind of doing the same thing. At Best Buy, I went back to the Nielsen Norman model, just because I like the way that one was framed up. And so right now we're in the process of like an informal assessment of the team, but it's starting to open up a lot of great dialogue around how we can improve the maturity overall. So that part is good. But that's one tool that I'm using. The second tool I'm using is this product development lifecycle. Now, the interesting thing about this is it's not necessarily specific to design. It could be, right? We could say this is a design lifecycle, right? We could say this is a software development lifecycle. But the biggest takeaway from this is this lifecycle is all about how products are being made within your respective company. Because what I've learned over the years is that I don't care what discipline you're in, if you're in legal, if you're in engineering, if you're in design, if you're in business, everything that gets done kind of happens in 5 stages, right? In general, right? You can take a lot of different models. You can take waterfall, you can take agile. There's some debate between which one is waterfall or is it agile, right? I kind of look at it at a much higher level, and I have this running joke. If you're a CEO of a company, everything is waterfall, because you don't think in sprints. You think in quarters and years, and everything to you is in a big bucket. And when you go down to your direct reports, you're saying, okay, have we created alignment around the thing that we're trying to discover? And then, okay, if we created that alignment, how are we doing our due diligence to make sure that we're not going to flush money down the toilet when we start on this endeavor? And then after we've done that discovery, okay, we should have a little bit more confidence about the thing that we're building. So, okay, design team, and not just design from a UI perspective. There's design in engineering, there's service design, there's operational design, like when you're designing spaces for people, when you're designing processes for people to follow, right? So design is a very broad term, but then that also gets into the development as well. Development is not just in code, right? Development can also be in brick and mortar. Development can also be in, molding plastic for new phones, right? Development has a broad term depending on your industry of choice. And then there's a monitoring phase. After you did the thing that you set out to do, is it producing the results that you thought it was supposed to produce? And if it is, great, move on to the next thing. If it's not, then you got to go back to the alignment phase and figure out what went wrong. Like, where did we miss it? And so that is the life cycle. Again, regardless of whatever industry, whatever discipline you are within your respective company, there is generally a 5-stage process to get that thing done. Our job as experienced designers, as UX professionals, is to figure out what is that process. And to figure out, once we figure out what that process is, we need to figure out where do we fit as design professionals within said process, right? And so those are the two tools that I've used over the years, right? But over time, I also learned something very interesting, is that there is a direct correlation between the maturity of your organization and where within the product development lifecycle that company can embed design. And so here's what I mean by that. If your maturity model for design is pretty absent, meaning we don't even recognize design as a full-fledged discipline within the organization, it doesn't show up anywhere in your product development lifecycle, right? But let's say you're more on the limited scale, right? Yeah, there are some people that kind of recognize that maybe UX is a thing, maybe experience design is a thing, but there's no management support for it. There's no money for it. If there's any inkling of design within the company, it's kind of after the fact. It's after the product is built, and you may have like one passionate person that's monitoring applications that have been launched, and at best they can just give somebody a report. Hey, here's what I found. Somebody ought to fix this. But then when they report it, it kind of falls on deaf ears because it can't move throughout the rest of the product development lifecycle because there is no infrastructure for it, right? Same thing for emergent, where it's okay, well, you're a little bit more than monitoring. Maybe there's a person, maybe there's a manager, maybe there's a designer working on that work, but again, it's kind of late. At best, what you could do is make some tweaks during development, right? If I were to use a non-software development term, let's say it's like an assembly line worker, right? And you're making shoes or putting cereal in boxes or whatever, right? You can't necessarily change the fact that Cheerios are going into the boxes instead of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. But what you can change in that development life cycle is, okay, maybe there's too much cereal going into the box. You can make small tweaks, but if I'm still sending out the wrong product, I'm too far down the development life cycle to make big sweeping changes like that. And then it just kind of goes up and up into the rest of the development life cycle. So the more mature you are, you start to see that companies are more willing to bring in design at earlier stages of the software development life cycle, and they'll start to invest in more diverse roles, right? They'll invest in managers, they'll invest in designers versus researchers, versus strategists, right? And the diversity of the roles in design kind of increase the more you mature, right? And so that's that correlation that I came to understand. And so I'll kind of talk about a couple of different, or maybe 2 or 3 different scenarios where this kind of played out in my career. So the first one is my career at Hallmark Cards. And so this one was the thing I think just launched my UX career. At the time, I didn't realize that. But looking back, I was like, wow, this is exactly the moment that I was in. So when I started my career back in 2001 at Hallmark Cards, the first project that I was put on was this initiative called Hallmark Stories. And it was way ahead of its time, right? Like this is like a no-brainer in technology now, but the idea of taking a digital camera and taking the SD card out of it and putting it into your computer so that you can upload photos to this website, and this was like back in the Roadrunner days, which at the time Roadrunner was cutting edge, but it's still slow in comparison to today's speeds, right? Um, but then the fact that the customer had to have Roadrunner and a smart a camera with a chip and that disc reader on, like there were so many ifs that the customer had to have to be able to do this. But then once they uploaded their images into this website, hallmarkstories.com. The website isn't even up anymore. They will upload the photos, and the website will just ingest all of their photos, and then automatically it would produce this snapbook or a photo magazine or something like that, right? And at the time, we were kind of touting that, oh my God, this is the best thing since sliced bread. This is going to be so amazing. Our customers going to eat this up. Shutterfish and no, was it? I mix those up. Snapfish and Shutterfly were competition at the time. Those two companies are still here. Uh, we were competing against those companies for like products. But as I'm still a newbie at Hallmark, right? I'm in like the first year of my career there, but I'm a Java developer. I'm like creating the front end of JavaScript server pages, and I'm looking at this overall design, and I'm telling my team like this is not right. This experience doesn't feel right to me. And I was trying to explain to them that the target audience is somebody like my mother, who is very creative. They like to build crafts and things like that. But essentially what our solution did, it took that part of the experience away from somebody like my mother, right? My mother doesn't have any issues organizing photos, right? I can go to my mother right now and say, hey, do you remember that photo when we were playing in the park, and I had on the blue shorts and my brother had the bicycle, right? And she knows like in a few minutes she can go reproduce that picture right away. She has no issue organizing photos. But Hallmark thought that was the problem they were solving. So it was like, don't organize your photo, just upload all the photos and we'll just automatically take care of it for you. And they missed the fact that, or they missed the opportunity to give somebody like my mother the opportunity to digital scrapbook, right? And so I was bringing that up with the team, but again, I'm too far into the development process. I'm way too late in the overall process, and I'm trying to introduce something that is kind of foreign to them. And long story short, it took us a long time to get to a place to where the input that I was giving them was actually like something that we should explore deeper. Eventually, we did focus groups and things like that, and a lot of the recommendations that I made early on kind of came to fruition, right? We would do the focus groups, and customers like one by one would come in and just tear apart our design, and they will undo all of the auto magic that Hallmark tried to present, to the point to where we decided to redesign the overall experience. But I think it was we decided one week, we decided that, hey, this is going to be the next release. I actually put together a proposal for the team to redesign the application. The management team approved it, and we were off and running. And literally like a week or two later, the marketing team came in and shut down the project because it was hemorrhaging too much money. It just wasn't creating the experience that we wanted to create, and so they killed the project and disbanded the team. And I remember at the time, just in that moment, just sitting in the back of the conference room, I was thinking to myself, like, who are these two people from marketing? I don't understand why they're crying. Why did they take this project away from me? Like I was almost there. I was gonna save it. I was gonna turn it around like single-handedly, right? But at that moment, I realized that, they killed the project because even though I had a good idea, I was too far down the funnel to make the impact upstream to fix it early enough, and essentially the project failed, right? We learned a lot of great things from that project, but ultimately we had to kill the project because I was coming in with all of these ideas, but I'm in the development realm, right? And so this is like a classic example of, I'm using heuristic analysis early on. Eventually we did some usability testing and focus groups, but again, it's kind of far too late. I'm in the development life cycle, right? The design for done. My team was just charged with just cranking out code and putting it out as fast as possible, right? But I had to use everything that I learned in this phase to build advocacy with my management team and my developers to challenge the status quo, to kind of shift left, if you will, in the development lifecycle to improve the overall product. And then again, here are some of the similar maturity level challenges that we have in there, right? Insufficient planning and budget, the inconsistency in effort. So apparently, like unbeknownst to me, there was a marketing team working on this, but I didn't know. I was in my tech bubble. I was a developer. Only people I talked to were the developers and literally the designers that were like taking the design and like throwing it over the cubicle wall to me to finish. Like that was it. That was all I knew. I didn't know that there were all these other efforts going on, right? And so those are some of the challenges that I recognize. Like hindsight, I recognize those are some of the challenges of being too late in the process. And so on my next project and the subsequent process, I always held on to that. And I said, okay, well, how do I get past that, right? And so in another example where I found myself in a position where we're not in the development life cycle, we're square in the design phase, right? We've built a team, we've built a structured team around design. And this is very much a, hey, Calvin and his team, you guys need to do something before we give it to development. Okay, great. This is a great place I need to be. This feels totally different than the last project, so I can run with this. Now, the challenge with this, and I have some of those bullets in here, is that it feels good when you have a structured design team, but we can't get settled here, right? Because I think in this, because you have a design team, now there's this new expectation of being an agency, right? So I come to the design team with my order, right, and say I want it my way, and like just snap fingers, and then hey, just get it to me. And so that's where that miscommunication, that misalignment comes in, where you have designers like us who are saying, yes, I'm a dedicated design team, but I'm really trying to solve bigger problems. Where other people are coming to you saying, maybe you should just be, designing the screens that I need. And I felt that was the case with the teams that I was building at the Federal Reserve Bank. Because again, when I was there, really in the beginning, it was like a team of one person. And then we evolved the team to, I think about, 12 or 13 folks at one point, all dedicated to working on UX. And so if you think about, even though that was on, over a few years for the organization, understanding what that meant to the organization, historically, they had never worked with a dedicated structured design team. And so it's like, well, how do you work with a team like that? Well, and all the designers on the team are pretty good. And so it gets people excited, right? They're excited. Oh, I have a designer. I have, one or two designers working on my business line. So I should be able to tell them I want to do whatever I want to do. And in some cases that's good, but in a lot of cases we ended up skirting the design process because we had our pet designer like in our back pocket, and they're not working on anybody else's work, and so I can kind of hold on to them a little tighter and do that work. And that's where a lot of the misalignment and things came in. The good part about that, though, again, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. You were able to build that team camaraderie, right? You were able to say, because I have a dedicated design team, you're able to get in and understand the business from a different perspective. You're able to spend time with product managers and engineers, and the more you spend time with them, the more you build empathy for those different cross-functional teams, and it just gives you more insight on how you can build a better relationship with those respective teams. But again, I think one of the challenges that we ran into quite often is those growing pains. How much is too much? How little is too little? One of the ongoing challenges we had was the designer ratio. I remember at one point working at the Fed, I enlisted the help of Gartner to help us figure out or to articulate what is a healthy ratio of designers to developers. And we came up with this number that said about one designer to about four developers is a healthy mix. If you do about 1 to 8, you can get by, but things are going to start to get squirrely. I remember there was one project that was going pretty bad. The ratio was one designer to 22 developers. And on one hand, you may find yourself where people are putting UX, throwing UX under the bus, right? But when I can come to the table and I can say, okay, well, let's look at this project that everybody is enamoring. They're just like, oh my God, this is the best thing since sliced bread. What was the ratio on this project? Well, the ratio on that project was 1 to 4. The project that you can't sleep at night because things aren't going well, what's the ratio on that project? Well, that was 1 to 22. All right, Mr. or Mrs. VP, what do you want to do now? I'm showing you the numbers. I'm showing you why we're getting the results that we want with our structured team. But just having a structured team isn't enough. You still have to be strategic. You have to align resources to certain initiatives. At some point, we were even saying, maybe UX, maybe everybody doesn't get UX. Maybe we reserve UX and this structured team for high ticket items, right? That helped in a lot of situations. But aligning, our success to to measured outcomes instead of being like those visual, like an agency. Like, we're not just a design agency that you can just whip things out. No, we want to be measured by measurable impact. And so that was the thing that helped us move from the structured design phase to this next phase, where you're starting to incorporate more integrated discovery work, right? And so here again, I'll reiterate the whole, where your maturity level is kind of where you are able to influence and inject design in your overall design process, right? And so this is the case for my time at Lowe's, where we did a really, really good job of making a case of spending time with our end users. At Lowe's, my end users were actual employees that worked in the store. We called them Red Vest. And so we did a really good job of building rapport with our stakeholders in store operations. And building that relationship, they allowed us to go to the store quite freely, to talk to Red Vest, to get information and get perspective on how we can build better software for them. And we bake that into our development lifecycle. And so when we work with our product managers and our engineers, it was kind of twofold. We brought the product managers and the engineers and the business stakeholders into our discovery process. And then as a result, we were able to say, hey, look at all this goodness we're getting because we're talking to the people that have to use the software day in and day out. Without that, we're all just kind of, we're all waving in the wind. We're just guessing whether or not this is going to be a good solution. And actually, when I started at Lowe's, that's exactly what we were doing. We didn't test with any employees. The development team just designed something and put it out there. And I said, okay, well, if this is what we got, let's just put it in the store and let's see how people respond. And they hated it. And then I said, all right, well, since they hate it, can we just kill it and start over and do it right, the second time? And the product managers were a little reluctant to do that. And I said, okay. And it was kind of a test for me to kind of understand where everyone's risk tolerance was. But one of the things I did, and I think this was probably the best move that I made, I went to the stakeholders. I went to our stakeholders in store operations, and I said, hey, tell me what your biggest challenge is with deploying new technology, or just in general, just working, whether it's directly with my team or whoever. What are some of your biggest challenges? And the thing I kept hearing over and over again was, I just want to be a part of the process. I have ideas too. I have experience because a lot of them came from the retail stores, and I just want to be heard. I just want to be a part of the process. And in my mind, I'm thinking, if that's it, if that's all you need, then great. We will invite you to our next, discovery meeting. We'll invite you to our design sprint, and we will we'll put a light out for you. We'll pull a seat and just have you be there, and you can mix it up with the rest of the designers and developers. And that's what we did. We started to, again, make that an intentional part of our development lifecycle. And in some initiatives, it was a little bit easier than others. It was easier to work with some uh, business partners than others. But once we did it once for one project, and they saw the results, they saw all of this good these good discovery sessions we were having, more teams wanted to do it. And I think there were a lot of good things that came out of that. And so during our OKR process, we created a habit to where the researchers that were on my team were able to create human-centered OKRs and make that a part of our um, quarterly planning meetings. And so every quarter we were able to say, okay, well, I know product managers, you have your objectives and things you want to accomplish. I want to make sure that there is at least one or two UX specific human centered metrics, that we're reading out every month, or not every month, every quarter in our quarterly planning. Now, how do we do that? Well, we had to, like a quarter or two prior to that, we had to have some sort of a roadmap of research that we wanted to do. So when that quarterly planning hit, it wasn't us scrambling trying to figure out what we're going to talk about. We can just copy and paste something that we already had in our report. And there was a beautiful artifact that we created out of. We created this research library that we created in SharePoint. And in the beginning, it was super scrappy, right? But over time, as we added more and more things to it, it became really, to me, it was like a work of art. And so anytime anybody did any research from my team, I said, you know what, don't worry about over organizing it. Just throw it all onto a SharePoint site. And then we started to use a lot of the features in SharePoint to document what type of research was it? What type of artifact was it? Who was the stakeholder? Who was the business owner for this? And over time, we started to put all kind of stuff in there. There were recorded videos from store visits. There were journey maps. There were notes from contextual interviews. I mean, we had all kind of research inside of this one thing. And it got to the point where we had enough research in it to where I can be in meetings and somebody will bring up a comment and I can go, hold on, let me see if that's in our library. And I will pull up the library and actually share my screen and show whether or not we had that information. So other teams didn't have to start from scratch, and we could start to recycle that information and start to create like a shared understanding of the work that we're doing, right? And so we're trying to break a lot of these myths of, UX takes too long. We don't have time for research. Everybody has time for research, right? You're either going to do it right now or do it right later because we didn't take the time to do it right the first time, right? You're gonna do it. And so this was good. This was good for us to be able to intentionally integrate research into our development life cycle, bake that into our OKR process, and just make experience design more transparent going forward. So now the next one, I won't talk about this one too much, but because I'm still learning. I'm still learning in my new role at Best Buy. But I will say that Best Buy is probably one of the places where I feel like being user-centered or user-driven is not just lip service. Are they perfect? No. There's no perfect organization that does this like 100% right. But this is the first place in a while that I've seen a company like I can feel and I can see them trying to be user-centered every day. It's not just a slogan. Internally, like we're having some really good, heated debates about the work we should or should not do based upon certain user-centered metrics. And so I will say for right now, more to come on that. Hopefully I'll have some good stories to share, or better yet, you might just see it in real life. You might go to Best Buy, you see some of the solutions that we're putting together, but it's good stuff. But I wanted to kind of put this slide together to just kind of show that when the company is truly user driven or user centered, it starts at the very top, right? I think there was one particular. I'll go back to my experience at the Fed really quickly. There was one particular customer that we were working with that would always say, I don't want to start any initiative until Calvin and his team comes in first, right? They were like really trying hard to not just design screen for screen's sake, but to say, hey, we need to start with clear problems. We need to understand the customer. We need to understand the end user. And then based upon that, let's figure out what we need to do together as a team, right? But it really speaks volumes when the whole company is saying that, when like divisions of an organization is stood up just to address those issues. And then what does that look like from a development life cycle? It means that you can come in from the very beginning, the very inception of an initiative, and say, what do we know about the customer? What kind of information do we have about the customer? And you have a slew of people that can bring that perspective and bring that insight to help the rest of the team make better decisions, all in all. I will say here too, that even if a company reaches this stage, it's hard for them to maintain it because of a number of different factors, right? This is why, you see companies like Sears or Toys R Us go away, because the thing that made them innovative a few decades ago, maybe they're no longer doing that for a number of reasons. Leadership changes, maybe they just didn't change with the times. Who knows, right? Every situation is a little different. Um, but as the saying goes, what got you here won't get you there, right? And so you constantly have to be um, realigning. You constantly have to be saying, well, this is my user today. Is that the same person tomorrow? And making sure that you're keeping your customers and your employees in the forefront in everything that you do. So that is kind of how I see this whole thing frame up. So again, I'll go back to the point. I hope you guys were keeping notes on like locating where you are, where your team is, where the organization is, where you in the overall life cycle, and using things like the Nielsen Norman Group, the maturity model can help you understand like where you are in the grand scheme of your organization. And then likely you could look at that 5-step process for producing any product, again, regardless of industry or whatever. Generally 5 steps at a much higher level will get the thing done. Where do you and your team align and all of those things? Once you've figured out how you align in those different areas, you can now start to ask yourself, all right, well, how do I navigate? How do I move within this system? Kind of going from left to right. How do I follow this cyclical cycle to make sure that I'm constantly looking for ways to mature and improve and just do the work that we all know that we need to do. And then the more and more you can pick up on those patterns and find areas to do that, you can start to create that assimilation, right? To where it's not a maturity model and a design process. It's your design process is so inclusive of your design discipline that it's one and the same, right? When a company starts an initiative and they say, hey, we all need to align on this thing, they don't leave out the UX team, right? They'll say things like, I'm not moving 1 inch until we get the UX team in here, the product owner in here, the engineers in here, the customer in here, the employees in here, right? I want that insight, right? And that's what that assimilation looks like. Every phase of your development life cycle, there are elements, right? It's design and your process are one and the same. And just to give you like another view or another lens to kind of look at this too, I kind of drew up this map to say, once you identify where you are, the goal of every team is to kind of figure out, okay, well, if I'm limited and all I can do is just monitor the things that are already wrong, I have no authority to change any products or anything like that. One of the easiest things you can do is you can start to say, all right, well, how can I learn from that and give that input to the development team so they can slowly start improving the overall product, and just know that, what, the fallout from that might be you give it to the development team and then you're hands off. That might be where you are. But if you do that more and more and more, and the phrase I like to use is like, if you start creating a bunch of work for people and somebody realizes how much work you're creating, guess what? Now that creates an emergent experience. You're no longer limited. Somebody needs to oversee all of these UX bugs. That was one of my tricks for the longest time. If nobody was listening to the upfront information that I had about design, I said, you know what if I created a bunch of UX bugs and then created a massive backlog of stuff to do? And then the developers were like, I don't like writing CSS. I don't like HTML. I don't want to do this. Well, okay. So I guess we got to hire designers to do that work then, because somebody's got to clean up this Jira backlog. I don't know. So those are the games that you have to play, in this corporate environment, right? And so even if you're kind of sitting in this space where maybe you have a structured development or design team, you're not quite as structured as you would like to be. It may require you to do like some guerrilla research, right? One of the things that I've done many times in my career is if there's a task that, let's say there's a task and it takes me 2 weeks to get the task done, right? I'll carve out just enough of time in that 2 weeks to do the design, but then also go put it in front of an employee. If I can officially hire a researcher or officially carve out 2 weeks to do research, I will find a way to validate this design some way, shape, or form. If I can do that enough, and I can create enough research tickets or enough, open opportunities to do more research, now it opens up the door for me to be more integrated and more intentional about the research, right? You're essentially creating a job. You might even create a job for somebody else. You might open up enough work to where it's too much just for you. And maybe your boss could open up an opportunity to, bring in more researchers to help out with the workload. So that's the goal, right? Locate, navigate, assimilate, figure out where you are, figure out how to get to where you want to be, and then look like the thing that you're trying to strive for. And, you can say it another way, right? You can say, it's really about the people. It's really about understanding you and the team that you work on. It's about understanding the process so that you can navigate to those different areas. And it's also about the tools. And it's not just tools as in, are we using Miro? Are we using Figma? Are we using Sketch? But it's more about the social tools, the business acumen to be able to have those critical conversations with your peers, with your stakeholders, with your leaders, with customers, with employees, to be able to make the change that you want to make in your organization. So last little plug before we hang up. I wanted to kind of throw this in here too. The former CEO of our organization put together this book, and we're actually reading it internally in the company about the heart of business. I had an opportunity not to meet Hubert Joly, but I was at a conference. I was in a Blacks in Technology conference a few years ago. It was in Minneapolis, and he did a fireside chat. And I have to tell you, I was blown away at his transparency. I was blown away by his candidness and his vulnerability to basically say, there are certain aspects of Black culture that I just don't understand. But most of our employees are Black, so help me understand what I don't understand. And so from that moment, I got a glimpse of kind of his heart in that moment. And that was one of those memories that I held on to even as I was applying for this new role that I'm here now serving. But shortly after I joined the company, he released this book, and we're reading it internally, The Heart of Business. And so if you are looking for a new business book, I highly recommend this, because this is, like I told you guys before, I feel like the first time in a long time I'm at a company that is not just lip service when it comes to being human-centered and user-driven. Are they perfect? No, but are they trying? Are they putting their money where their mouth is? Yes, and I can see it like day in and day out as I'm working there. And I think a lot of that has to do with the type of leaders that Hubert is, and a lot of the leaders that are still there. And so in him writing this book, it talks about the heart of business. It talks about just being at a place and having purpose. And it's not just about work, but it's about, are you doing the thing that you were destined to do? And are you in the environment where you feel like you can do that? So if you're looking for like that next leadership book, I highly recommend this book. Another reason I'll recommend this book is because of our teen tech centers. Again, another thing that Best Buy is putting their money where their mouth is. They are building these teen tech centers all across the country. I think there might be one, if not up today, I think they're in the process of building one in the Kansas City area, where they are basically building these Best Buy branded centers, and they're decking them out with cameras and software and all these type of computers for kids to come in and learn different aspects of technology, to create cool stuff, to do photography, video, app develop. Like there's so many different aspects of technology that they're just giving these experiences to teens as a way to basically provide opportunities for them in the future, whether that's for them to go and build their own businesses, or for them to be employed at any one of our companies. And as this book is 100% of the proceeds are going to the Teen Tech Centers. And I knew about Teen Tech Centers before I joined the company. I actually reached out to them to see if I can get them to build one in Kansas City, and they had already told me that they were building one in Kansas City at the time. So I was like, okay, great, that's cool. And now that I'm in Charlotte, I reached out to them again and said, hey, you need to build one in Charlotte. And they were like, we're already building one in Charlotte. I'm like, yes, all right. And so if you needed another reason to buy the book, this is another great one. So I put a couple links in here for you to check it out. You can go to Hubert Jolie's website and learn more about the book. You can search for Teen Tech Centers on bestbuy.com. I got the QR codes in here, so if you're an Amazon person, you can buy it there. We also sell the book directly on our website. So please check it out. Hope you, if you get it for you, or if you get it for a gift, just know it's going to be a double gift. You will learn more about the heart of business, and hopefully there's some stories in it that resonate with you. But then just know that the proceeds are going to Teen Tech Centers, and your donation might be going to one of your future employees, or peers on your design team, or what have you. So thank you all for the opportunity to geek out with you all. Here's my information. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm most active on LinkedIn. I have Twitter and Instagram. I'm rarely on it. I'm way more active on LinkedIn. But yeah, that's it. So if you have questions, I am all ears. No question is too big or too small. But thank you again for allowing me to chat.
Calvin, thank you so much just for opening up just the hour here. I know I myself have taken away some small, tidbits on just the blend of these two processes, right? To which organizations see almost as individual processes, right? Like I've heard of the shift left, and I've done workshopping on how do you begin to, get design in front of, the project and kind of look at it from that lens, but also looking at that maturity model. Just for those on the call, I did plug the PDF of the maturity model from Nielsen Norman, as well as the website, as well as DJ also plug that. So Calvin, thank you again so much for just spending this hour with us. I know we're not done. We've got some people coming in on the chat. Some are just coming in saying great reflection of the process. Tom mentions Roadrunner. I remember that. Totally laughed about that. That was something
Yeah.
that he had called out there. But and getting to some of these questions here, when talking more about, you start moving up, to the maturity model. Specifically, you were talking about UX designers. One question came from Matt. He said, when you say designers, are you including research and a hybrid UX designer? All inclusive, right? Because as we get more structured, more integrated, you're starting to see the buy-in of these different roles, right? From organizations who are truly saying, the needs there, how do we begin to fill that based on that? So Matt, hopefully that answers your question. Did you have any more to add to that, Kelvin?
Yeah. I think it is all inclusive, and there's also a savviness that goes along with that as well, right? Because I think when you are, I'll use the designer, researcher, just those two roles, right? We could go into so many different roles in design, but I'll just use those two. There are moments within the product development lifecycle where maybe more of the lion's share of the work goes to the researcher than it does the designer. And sometimes people outside of design may not understand that distinction. They may think, I got a UXer, so I need you to come in and do the thing, right? And so you may be a designer in a position, you're early in the process, but what's required of you is research. And maybe you're not the best researcher, right? And so those are those things. It's kind of like a case by case basis to where it is all inclusive. But again, being sensitive to the audience, when you say all inclusive, does all inclusive mean, for you, all inclusive may mean we need to bring in a researcher and a designer. When you say all inclusive to somebody else, they may hear, oh, I just need one person. I need that unicorn that could do research, design, build a UI in React.js, right? Like I should be able to like just get that person, right? So I think you have to be careful, and then also have that savvy to say, early in the process, we're going to do research, or we're going to do some facilitated, collaborated workshops. And then once we're done with that, we're going to put that aside, and then we're going to take the feedback from that and then go build a prototype. And those require two different skill sets. And you have to know, not only do you have to know the process, you have to know like what's required at each stage of the process, and to help teams outside of design surface the right activities and deliverables for our best interest, right? So yeah.
And I think just one more thing to kind of piggyback up on that, when you start to look at Hallmark all the way to the way you've kind of gone up on the process, looking at buy-in, right? Because were you working as a role as a developer, right, at Hallmark, right? But starting to key on some of those key pain points. Talk about that step to which you start looking at, okay, as an organization, we need to identify these. So you started to, kind of create more of a backlog of these bugs. Then we need buy-in from the business, right? So what are those conversations, those critical conversations that are happening that you begin to say, okay, if we're going to go all in, right? If we're putting all our chips on the table, what are some of those conversations that are happening? And then some of those that might start from an emergent, right? And say, you know what? I have, there's a book out there, I think Leah Bewley, what is it? UX Team of One, right?
Team of One, yep.
Yep. And so you start to say, okay, if we're really going to put the chips on the table and start going in all on this, and we start to identify, we do need a researcher, we need, UX, and we need to have that ratio. What are some of those conversations that you're having?
That's a good one. I think, well, before I answer that, you said something that made me think about another analogy that I shared at UXtract. And I think so I'll say that, and then I'll back up and answer that question. There is this book, was it a book? Well, it's from John Maxwell. It's like the five laws of leadership. I think I got that right. Where he talks about the maturity of a leader, and there are these five levels, right? So imagine like a pyramid and these 5 levels. I can probably find a link and put it in here later, but
I've got you right here.
You got right. So the idea around those five levels is, once you go from level 1 to level 2, you don't jettison all the stuff you did at level 1. You have to do level 1 and level 2. And then when you go to level 3, you have to do level 1, 2, and 3, and all the way up to 5. So even though you're a level 5 person, a leader, you have to do all 5 levels. You just have to know when to do them, right? And so going back to your answer, what did those conversations look like when I was at Hallmark? So though I was in the emergent phase of the maturity, and I was in the development part of the life cycle, I had to operate at a much higher level. I still had to operate at that lower level even after we graduated to that next level. But at that lower level as a developer, and we've all been here, right? So you tried to design something, and then the developer will tell you, oh, it can't be done, or oh, that's impossible, or we don't have enough runway to do that. And that's natural, but it doesn't fix the problem. And that was one of my peers told me that. She said, okay, great, you have a point. You have to present it in a different way. And so I worked with her to present a proposal of the change that I wanted to see. And the proposal was basically like a requirements document. Well, developers typically don't build requirements documents. That typically comes from shift left, that comes from somebody else. It comes from either a product manager or BA or somebody like that. So I had to operate at a higher level to get outside of my comfort zone, to learn something that I didn't know, and I created a requirements document and a proposal to say, here's why the solution that we created is wrong. And I laid out the current experience, and then I laid out the new experience, which wasn't too far off from what we had. It was literally like, we just need to take the process and like reverse it, because you like, our process is close. You just need to reverse it. It's not in the order in which customers think. So it wasn't even a lot of work, but it was me understanding from a development perspective what needed to be done, what needed to be done from a design perspective, understanding the user requirements, and then presenting that in a way that I would expect the BA to do it. And then once we did that, and once it was approved, I then had to go back and talk to the developers the same way I was doing before. I had to talk to the designers and say, okay, well, now that you see the proposal, now I have to go in and explain to the designers why we designed it this way. I had to go talk to the developers. Okay, here's why we did it. Here's why we need to change it this way. I had to go back to my manager who supported this new process or this new concept and kind of explain to him on a regular basis, like, why are we doing it this way? And so that's what those conversations look like. Even though I was out of my comfort zone, I knew I had something. And I had to enlist the help of other people to help me articulate the change that I wanted to see. And that process really doesn't change to further, up the process you move. You may or may not have the words or the skills or the tools to articulate the change that you want to see, but that's where you either enlist the help of other people or take classes, read books. And so that's one of the ways that I've done it over the years. Is I'll typically go read a book or go take a seminar, and then I go do the seminar, and then I immediately apply the thing that I learned in the working environment, just so I can like get it fresh, out of my head and into my real situation. So hopefully that
No, absolutely. No, absolutely. I think that this next question comes from Nicole, and if I was mistaken it, or if I'm paralleling it right, it's when you actually went boots on the ground to actually talk to the Lowe's Red Vest, right? So you're here. You are. The question is, what if we have compliance security issues in order to talk with users? How do you gain trust and ways to focus on groups without compromising that? Nicole, did you want to speak any further to that, or does that kind of nail it, or just give me a thumbs up, or you can feel free to unmute.
No, that's pretty good. That's kind of our biggest thing why we haven't done focus groups just yet, is because we're still starting the process. Like I said, I have a lot of questions. I'm trying to build the process before we start building the team. So, and I'm just now becoming more in that leadership role. So I am more of a UI person, but I want to be the UX person because that's what I love, and just I want to get to know the customer more and be with the customer. But we can't get that compliance security issue because it has personal information in the CMS that we're trying to do. I'm trying not to give anything away because I will get in major trouble.
Sure.
So yeah, there's a lot of issues around that. Plus we're in a hush mode on certain things. So like we're just kind of like in a blocking mode right now, and it's really frustrating because we need that user feedback right now of what they're currently using. So any tips on how to get around that would be awesome.
Yeah, there's a couple. One way is heuristics. And heuristics can be pretty tricky because it's kind of like borrowed research, because you can't validate, your own user base. You're basically borrowing it from somebody else, and then there's a chance of, well, are these heuristics that I found, are they relevant for my use case? But sometimes that's better than nothing, right? Another thing I've seen is if you are able to find some other metric that moves the needle for the company. So I know in a lot of situations, I know as UX professionals, we always advocate for the user, but maybe in your situation, maybe it's not. Maybe the user is indirectly impacted. Maybe there is another, if it's a compliance thing, if there's some other like security factors or some other business metric that is directly tied to your success, your ability to tie what you do back to that thing, it allows you, it's kind of better than a heuristic in a sense. It allows you to tie the work that you do outside of just UI and design and back to a much higher business strategy. So it may not be a clean, solution, right? You're still going to have the challenge of, for compliance reasons, I can't talk to users. But my thought is, if you can tie back to some strategic metric and then get your leadership to say, okay, well, why are we not able to move this metric? Like what's blocking us from moving this metric? And maybe in that opens up an opportunity to say, well, not to let down your guard or to loosen the constraints, but to at least come together with your team and your leadership teams to say, how can we still remain secure and remain in compliant, but actually move this metric because it is, whether directly or indirectly, like tied to users, right? And so without you like sharing, too much about your world, that's typically a process that could work for any organization, right? Like any business, like all of us as designers, like we all have our job because the company itself has some metric. They're trying to accomplish something. And so your ability to tie to that in some way, shape, or form associates your design work to that much more strategic initiative. And maybe there's some connection you could take advantage of there. So
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if that helps or makes it worse.
No, it's really hard. And, like I said, I'm building the whole process. So I've been doing a lot of research, reading books, stuff like that. So this just came at a perfect time. So thank you. I really appreciate your models and stuff. I'm really going to dive into all that a little bit deeper. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you have like a sponsor or somebody that supports your work that you can lean on as well for extra muscle?
Are you offering?
Well, I don't know if I can do that within your organization, but I'm thinking.
I have a VP of product, and he just started a couple months ago, and he's helped getting all this on board, and we're getting them to think from a full process, which is, I'm super stoked about it, which is the whole reason why I came to this company. This is what we're going to be doing. But am I right? One of my other questions, I'll go ahead and dive into that really fast, was design is not just product, it's your marketing and sales. Like everybody should be, that shit is all part of our design, right? So I need to get my graphic designers on board and my video people and everything. Like we're all designing that touches the different customers at some point, right? All that's part of your That's what I thought.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, the fact that you have a VP, that's gold, right? Like take everything that you're getting here and share with them, because I think they should be able to see themselves in this process as well. And you're right, other disciplines within the organization that can help too, right? Your ability to connect with them and share that design process could, lift some of the burden as well. So
Thanks.
very cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelvin. A couple of coming up here. Isaiah just said, very interesting as someone hoping to transition into the UX industry. This is timely. But they go on to say, are there makers of or hallmarks that a person could look for in the interviewing process? So once again, are there markers of or hallmarks that a person could look for in an interviewing process? Isaiah, did you want to add anything to that one there?
Not really. I think it's just ironic because that's what I've been thinking about as a rookie in the UX world. I don't want to walk into my first UX job and be the lead designer. I want to be somewhere where I can learn inside the scope of the context of a team, or at least from some kind of mentor opportunity. And I mean, I guess that much would be fairly easy to decipher, to discern in an interview process. But on a broader scope, like to what degree has a business embraced this mode of thinking and this process and everything is exactly what I've been thinking about. And I would like to be able to sort of kind of get at least a feel for that. as I go
Yeah.
about looking for my first job?
That's an interesting question. So I think I know where you're coming from. It took me a while to know or understand the maturity of a company prior to coming into it. Because when I would see a job posting, it was great to just see a job posting that said UX, right? And that was enough. That was enough to get me to apply, right? And then once you're in, you're like, oh wow, this is different. But going forward, I started to ask certain questions, right? Like I mentioned the ratio question earlier, and so those will be questions that I ask going forward, right? So, am I the only designer, or am I like one of many, right? And so that tells me like how much they're investing in UX. What is the leadership structure for UX? Am I the only manager? So when I was at the Fed, I was the only manager for the Kansas City Fed. And then I went to Lowe's and I was one of 5 managers. And so that was interesting, right? But then I was one of 5 managers, but we had one director. And then that director was overtaxed. And then when I went to Best Buy, there were multiple directors, right? And a VP and a C-level officer for customer experience. And so knowing what those levels are, and those are fair questions to ask during an interview. What does your support structure look like? Because it's one thing to hire a bunch of designers, but if you have a bunch of designers reporting to technology managers or reporting to product managers that don't understand the design process, you're likely to run into some issues, right? Or maybe you have one UX manager, but there are like 50 engineering managers. It's like, well, why are the numbers lopsided like that? Like, why is that the case? So asking those questions early on is good. Also, one thing that I do now is when I look at a company, I like to look at their website, right? I like to look at the products that they're producing, and depending on what you're trying to get into, you could look at it one of two ways. You could look at a company that has a really great website and they go, wow, okay, because they have a great website, this is where I want to work. But then you get in and then you realize that the website was created by an agency, right? So the people internally didn't build the website, but they would love to, but they don't have the support to do that level of work, right? Or you go into a company and the website is horrible. Like I worked for a company years ago where the website was horrible. And then they brought me in and basically gave me free reign to change everything I wanted to change, right? And so that was great. So it just kind of depends on, where you want to be. But definitely asking those questions and just, whenever I went out for a new job, I interviewed them the same way they interviewed me. So no question to me is off the table. If I had a question, I just asked them about it. And another thing you could do too is if you have an opportunity to meet the rest of the team, if there's a larger design team that you can meet with, again, a fair question. Or if there's the engineering team that you're going to support or the product team that you're going to support, it just gives you a better sense of the culture before committing too far down the line. So,
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.
No, that was great. We're coming up to the last 5 minutes here. I think people have been great to put in their questions in the chat. Maybe we'll take a couple, 2 that I'll spot here. And then once again, I think you've opened your door, Calvin. People can reach out to you
Absolutely.
via LinkedIn. That's how we got connected too right away.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
he's open in that communication after this talk. And same with us here at the board. Feel free to continue that conversation in our happy hours as we continue this forward into the new year. Let's see. Ted comes in and says, any tips on influencing leaders or other stakeholders in your organization to support moving up the UX maturity ladder? It's kind of what we had talked about earlier, right? When you had
Yep.
really touched on that, looking at it from the Hallmark up to Fed into Lowe's. But did you want to have anything to kind of add to that?
Yeah, this is a good one. This is one of my favorite types of questions because I immediately go to don't just rely on a PowerPoint presentation. Don't just rely on, oh, these leaders should know this. Let me put a PowerPoint deck together. Let me show you what Gartner says or what Apple does or whatever like that. Well, I'll say it this way. That's not bad. That's not bad to kind of share what other players are doing. But more often than not, especially like the higher you go up the ranks, you're talking to people that are pretty smart. You'll probably show that to people that were like, you know what, I was there with Steve Jobs when he did, right? So any presentation you have to show me from Apple is like, I can probably tell you what the real story was, right? And so that's kind of the response you get because they've been there, done that. They've done so much that it can almost be underwhelming to just show them a presentation from our perspective. What they respond to mostly though is execution. And it could be super small, right? Whatever's in your sphere of influence, if you can prove that, hey, I saw a problem, I made this change, and here's how customers responded to it, or here's how employees responded to it, and here's what this means for us, even though it's like super, super small, if you show that to them and there's some validity behind it, like there's some magic behind it, they'll go, okay, tell me more. And then you can go into the presentation, right? It's when you go up, and I'm even learning to become more of a person like this. If a designer comes to me and like shows me a design, like they'll come to me and say, hey, I heard you say this in a meeting and I put this together. I think this aligns with, whatever problem that you have going on. I will look at that, and I got that the other day from one of my designers. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I needed to see. Let me bring you into this meeting because we got to go. Versus another person that says, hey, I've been thinking about this and I got this article off the internet, and I'll look at it and I'll go, okay, great. But what are we going to do with that? And I'm super busy, and I'm not as busy as other leaders. Right. And so when it comes to influencing those leaders to do the thing that you want to do, sometimes you have to ask for forgiveness versus permission and just do the thing. Even if you have to do the thing in off hours, do the thing in off hours, bring it to work the next day and say, hey, I did a thing. What do you think? And it makes you look good because you did the extra work that most people probably won't do. But if you hit the nail on the head, again, it doesn't have to be super elaborate, but if you're super savvy and you're paying attention to the things that keep your leaders up at night, and you address it with a visual or a design or a rough prototype or something, that speaks volumes to them. Now, how do you know what keeps them up at night? Like, this is where, especially on these Zoom calls, you got to read the room. It's going to be hard when you're not physically there, but read facial expressions. If leaders are asking questions and it feels like nobody in the room answered the question, maybe that's an opportunity for you to answer the question. I can't tell you how many times where I go to meetings and I leave the meeting like, nobody answered the question. Why didn't anybody answer the question? Okay, I have to answer the question because now I can't sleep at night because my boss's boss asked the question and I don't feel like she's satisfied. And so I got to figure this out. And so I'm back channeling. I'm sending people emails. I'm like, why are we not answering the question? But when you answer the question, and you put it out there, and then they see it and they hear it, they're like, finally somebody heard me. Okay, let me bring Calvin into this next meeting. Like that's how you make the change and you influence people. And it's going to be risky because sometimes you may put it together and you may not have all the answers, but you got to like muscle through that. If you got a hunch about something. So hopefully that resonated. Because that I wish it was more, I don't know, magical than that, but I can't tell. Like so many of my opportunities were simply because, you know what? Let me just throw it together. I'll spend an all-nighter, Jason, and I'll I'll throw something together last minute because nobody answered the question.